this demo, I can also record a quick screencast later with more notes, I guess. Okay, so back to share my screen. I was saying, you capture the fetch event, and then you fetch the file from IPFS, and then you create a fake response with your own headers. And you resolve that response, and by resolving, you are replying to that request with the content you fetched from IPFS. The repo is called IPFS Service Worker, and if you download it, you can see that there is a folder called examples and use from other page. The thing I did here was just creating a static HTTP server that is loading this folder called public plus SW, and it's just like a simple web page that registers the service worker, which is what you see here. So I'm going to reload this page. Right now, I had a service worker already registered, but I unregistered it, so it's like clean. When I load this page again, it's going to like load the service worker. And now, if we go to console, we see that like it installed, and I created the js-ipfs node. One thing to have as a note, I'm still trying to debug why, but like if I try to use it right now, the fetch event will not fire, ever. But if I reload the web page once, it does absolutely nothing to the service worker, and like it's the same thing, but now the fetch event is firing. So if there is any like service worker experts out there that understand why the heck, like on first load, it doesn't capture the fetch event, but like after a quick refresh, it works, please let me know. And I spent like a couple of hours trying to find answers on the web. Cool, so then I already know, I just need an hash of an image. I already know that there is a pretty good one available here on my PR notes. Here we go. If I put the hash here and click fetch, it fetches. It was pretty fast because like this image is cached on the gateways. But what happened was, okay, the fetch event was captured. It understood it was an IPFS hash. Again, did the node file scat on that multi-hash, received the stream, which is the file. We just concatenated the stream in one single data blob, and we created a response to the browser. And for the browser, this was like transparent. Like this web page doesn't need to understand that this content was loaded through a service worker. It just got it loaded. So yeah.
Load something in a new tab, David.
Again?
Load something in a new tab. Like, can you go to like IPFS.io and have it use your local daemon?
IPFS.io and use my local daemon. Not yet, because this would have to deploy to have another page to do that. Like we would have to deploy, for example, to IPFS.io this service worker, but then I could go to, I don't know, temple.com and like from IPFS.io URL there, by the service worker that was deployed IPFS.io, the real domain, so that the browser would know which service worker to fire. Right now, the only thing, service worker just takes local again.
Okay.
Yeah.
So is another way to word that is that IPFS.io would have to tell you to use this service worker, and then once it has told you to do that, then this service worker would intercept the request to IPFS.io.
Yeah.
But currently we don't have this service worker deployed.
Yeah. Exactly. So the way to achieve that is to have a service worker on IPFS.io that like any person that loads the page gets it working on their machine, and from then on, like all the IPFS hashes can be loaded to the service worker. Another thing that I was just talking with Matt today about that we can do is host the service worker in a domain like sw.ipfs.io, so it's not like on the main page, and use Lidl's extension to redirect IPFS.io requests to that service worker. This way, people that are using IPFS.io still use the gateways to fetch the content, and people that are using the IPFS extension will use the service worker with js-ipfs to fetch the content from the network. The web extension also would give you a way to like configure the service worker if you want like to provide to the network the content that you also fetch. If you want to have the node turn off and other things like that. But yeah, like this is very much a MVP, just to show how it works. And yeah, this is my demo. You need to use IPFS. So like we are going to release a new version of js-ipfs this week, 0.24. You need to use that one to use inside the service worker because there was a couple of things that needed to be fixed in order for this to work. Yeah, this is like the beginning of much more stuff, but yeah, we know now that like IPFS works in a service worker, and that we can do this redirect magic to load content from js-ipfs into any web page. Cool, awesome. Thanks, Jay.
So I want to just jump in there with what this makes possible is that the service worker is the thing that's providing js-ipfs. It's the thing that's providing an IPFS node to run in the browser, and so that is provided somewhat transparently to the user, and that we would configure the service worker to be like locked down by default, so that then when you install the web extension, when you're like, hey, I want to use IPFS, actually you will have already been using IPFS in a like constrained way because the service worker has already been injected by IPFS.io whenever you access some IPFS content. So the gateways just provide the service worker to make your life easier. But then when you're like, hey, I actively want to engage with this and use more functionality of IPFS, then that's when you install the web extension, and the web extension, use the web extension to then like open up, to like decrease, to unlock your lockdown version of the service worker. So to like reconfigure it to do more things, which we would want the end user to be aware of the fact that they have told their browser to have the service worker do those things, which are powerful, but we don't want it to just be happening without someone knowing it. And so, yeah, so that's like I think it's a wonderful avenue for getting IPFS embedded, like available in the browser without having to convince people to like go and download IPFS and like in order to be benefiting from it. Sort of like as soon as they access IPFS content, they start benefiting from IPFS. Other questions about that before we?
Lars?
Yeah, I have one.
Closer to the mic, Lars. And probably
sorry.
Off your video. The connection is not that great.
I think he's on a train.
Okay, better now? Okay, I was gonna ask, it's not gonna work with WebRTC, right?
Yeah, so the answer to that question is within the service worker, there are no plans to have support for WebRTC by the browser vendors. The thing that will probably happen is that there will be WebRTC support in web extensions. So what we can do in order to make this all happen is have two js-ipfs nodes, one running on the web extension, another one running inside the service worker, and make them super peered. Like if there is a block that the js-ipfs node is looking for that is on a service worker, then the one that is on the web extension will also look for the same block. And in the web extension, you will have this node connecting using WebRTC, and in the service worker, you will have this node connecting using WebSockets. You might be wondering, why do not have this node on the web extension in the first place? And the reason to that is because the web extension is not able to capture requests. We have to have a service worker to act as an HTTP proxy for our requests so that we can create responses for it. The web extensions today only let us to capture the headers of the requests and do redirects. We cannot create responses from a web extension. So yeah, it has to be like a mix of these two technologies that exist on the browser. Unfortunately, both of them are really like bleeding edge. Like both web extensions and service workers are draft specs, and they are still getting implemented and more stable on the browsers. And the WebRTC support, even for the web extension, is not there yet. It's just a proposal, but at least it's a proposal that is moving. So yeah, we will continue actively working on this and getting it more stable and stable. And we see that like this is something that is a huge bet by the browser vendors, like service workers and web extensions. So yeah, we do have high hopes to have in the near mid future a way to install js-ipfs through a web extension and have it just work in all the browsers using specs, WebRTC specs. You have something?
Yeah. Well, I was also just like rerouting, but well, in like case people have questions about that. Oh well, we lost Lars, so he can't ask follow-up questions. Did other people have questions before I jump in? I don't see anyone raising their hands. So the thing you forgot to ask is, what are the things that prevent us from shipping this on IPFS.io today? And the answer is that the biggest so there's, we have to make a version of the service worker that's sort of locked down and more like defaults to being very safe. That's not a big deal. What it forces us to tackle is connection closing, which is hard.
Yeah.
And so maybe David could explain
so, on that, right now, the way that IPFS works is just like it tries to maintain all the connections that it gets to all the peers that it gets to know as it lives. And that makes it very, very expensive for the browser because because we have like all this routing functionality happening in one single thread, that is very intense for a single browser process to execute. And if the number of connections increase on a js-ipfs node, let's say to like close to 50 or 60, there has been other experiments that see something very similar, where the browser would crash out of resources by doing so much work on trying to like compute all of these functions to figure out where to send want lists, which nodes to connect, and so on. So we will need to get this deployed into the network, a way to understand what is the value of each connection that we have to other peers, like a simple replication mechanism, so that we can understand which connections we can close at given points in time, and then limit the number of connections that each browser has open. We don't want like a browser to have 100 connections open at one point in time, because that will just like exhaust the browser resources. Yeah. Yeah. So does this make sense to everyone? Like essentially, we need to be able to close connections. Otherwise, we will kill browsers.
Yeah, in order to close connections, you have to be able to prioritize connections so you know which ones are okay to close. And that's because if we don't have that, and then we make it so that everyone who hits an IPFS.io gateway is going to get the service worker installed and running on their machines, we're going to get an explosion of machines running. They're all going to connect with each other.
So the way we deploy this is not by putting it on default. You would have a little switch on the IPFS.io, right? You initially allow people to opt in going to the website.
Yeah, well,
soft rollout.
Either way, before, like, even if we will still have an explosion in the number of js-ipfs nodes running, and they will overwhelm each other. Like,
right.
We need.
Yeah, we still need to solve the problem.
They can close connections. Prioritize.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other option would be to not use, like to just try to dial to the gateways and that's it. Like just use a single connection to the gateways and like not use things like relay to open more connections on their nodes. But then like it stops being, it's not more interesting than you just using the gateways directly. So yeah, we want to start with a solution that actually makes the nodes be able to connect to any other network, because that's going to be the interesting part of having the protocol running on the browser.
Yeah, and I would actually expect that we would not make it so that like, so I think it would be strange if I hit IPFS.io/IPFS/a hash and the gateway did more than just return the content I requested. Right? If it was also returning content that tells your browser to install the service worker, that seems a little bit like it sort of breaks the whole content addressed thing. Mm-hmm. So we will probably make it so that you have to go to a different spot on the gateway and say, tell it to enable the service worker, and then every time you hit IPFS content, it'll.
There is also one more thing that we need to make this all happen. But like Lars has a question to Lars.
Yeah, sorry, I had to run to the 3G network. We're just discussing whether to inject the service worker into any content on the gateway.
Lars, do you understand the question?
Yeah, what was the question, Lars?
The question was basically what you're discussing right now. It sounds like you're discussing whether to inject the service worker into anything that's served on. Yeah, I think I agree with Matt. We shouldn't do that just because of the content addressing.
Yeah. So and like, but doing that on like having the service worker on serviceworker.ipfs.io, and then like having the web extension to be the one going to that page to install it, and like having the web extension to control that service worker, because the service workers also have a messaging mechanism to talk with it. You don't have like to fake HTTP requests to configure it. That's actually part of the spec. We can be way more explicit with our users that like they are using IPFS. There is this thing that is installed in your machine, and tell them like statistics of what it is doing. More than just like, because the service workers, how they work today, if you go to Chrome, //service workers, you'll see like more than 10 service workers, I'm sure, from all the web pages that you are visiting that you don't even know that they are there. But a lot of like sites are using. There is one more thing. You have like one comment?
Well, yeah, like along that line, it actually would not break the convention of how websites use service workers now if IPFS.io, the website, actually installed the service worker when you visited without even telling you. We probably would tell you, but like plenty of websites install service workers when you visit them without you knowing that it installed a service worker.
Lars? I still have one more thing to add. That's all.
Yeah, we would probably want to tell people, just because it makes persistent connections, it consumes your bandwidth, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and like just helps people understand that they are actually using IPFS. I think that's going to be valuable, just like communication there. So there's one more thing that we need to make this very useful, which is right now Unix-FS doesn't, or the way that we fetch content from IPFS doesn't tell us necessarily anything about its data type. And for the browser to load content, or for example, the image, the browser could figure it out. It was an image, so it could render it properly because I was using an image tag. But for many other content types, we actually need to specify on the header what type of content it is. If people add files to IPFS under a directory, and if they don't delete the file extension, then we probably can get away with a lot of file formats. But if, for example, people have like some PDF that they have on their machine with IPFS add without wrapping on a directory, then we completely like forget that it is a PDF. And we need to have a way, basically level up Unix-FS data format to preserve the file name, the file type, so that we can, when we are serving content through js-ipfs and we are fetching it, we know which header to write so that the browser knows how to render it properly. So yeah, I guess those are two things why we cannot deploy this today: the reputation and file types.
One more thing, and this is like partially specifically to Lars, but everyone think about what are the things that we should do to make the service worker default to being extremely safe to have running on your machine, right? So like have it default to not doing anything that might be unsafe or compromising that user in any way, and then let it be that then you have to install the web extension or go to some configuration page in order to turn on functionality that you want that might, depending on different circumstances, might be unsafe. So for example, like setting up persistent connections that might like expose you in some way to like being, having it be known that you're running the node. You might want to have that turned off by default. So if you weigh in on that repo, Lars or anyone else who has ideas about how to, like, what are the things that we should absolutely have the service worker turn off by default, you should put that in an issue on that repo.